Hello, friends. Welcome again to this dialogue on the implications of the WTO Agreement on India's fishing communities. And as Richa has introduced me, I'm Shalmali Guttal. I'm with Focus on the Global South. I'm joining you from Goa in India. Now, in India, more than 28 million people are designated as fish workers as a large, small-scale fishing community, and these are marine fish workers. We're not even talking about the freshwater fish workers and fishery communities, because those are even many more, an additional millions are there. And in this, 44% of the 28 million fish workers are women. And this fishery sector contributes nearly 1% to the country's GDP, but probably, this is by the more conventional accounting. My guess is that there is actually the contribution of fish workers and the small scale fisheries to India's GDP and overall economic health is much, much greater and has been undervalued in this kind of GDP calculation. But despite this, the fish workers and the fishing communities face tremendous challenges, as Richa already mentioned some. And even their future continues to remain in jeopardy because they're not getting the kinds of supports that they need, and that is their right as citizens of a nation. Now, some of the challenges, there are definitely extreme weather events that are related to climate change that all directly affect their livelihoods. And, studies indicate that South Asia and especially India, because of its large coastal area, is particularly vulnerable to climate change impacts. And India ranked 7th most affected country on the Global Climate Risk Index. And just in 2019, India was hit by a record 9 cyclones, which severely affected the livelihoods and the homes of the fish workers. In addition, of course, there are other impacts such as droughts, sudden floods, and so on, which affect access to food and which affect other services that the small scale fishing communities really need for their well-being as people, but also for their livelihoods. Then there's COVID-19 struck, as Richa pointed out again. And during COVID-19, Focus on the Global South did a lot of, we did a lot of consultations and discussions with the fish workers, and especially the women fish workers. And this was one of the hardest hit sectors because of the closure of local territorial markets, the absence of cold chains, the absence of infrastructure that would allow fish workers to be able to get their fish to market, because after all, fish is a perishable. It's not like some kinds of grain that can be stored without the appropriate infrastructure. Then there has been the draft Indian Marine Fisheries Bill, which then demands that small-scale fishers and fish workers have to have a license to fish in the exclusive economic zones and the high seas, which again restricts their fishing activities. And it doesn't consider the special and differentiated needs of small-scale artisanal fishing communities, despite the fact that the Indian government was fighting, or was at least in language or text was pushing for special differential treatment in the World Trade Organization. And the draft bill also has diluted the emphasis on biodiversity, on ecosystem integrity, conservation, and sustainability, which has, of course, serious ramifications on the fish workers' livelihoods, because we also have data, from the Food and Agriculture Organization that shows very sharp decreases in sustainable fishing over the past several years. And the latest data, at least from 2019, implies that nearly 35% of stocks have reached unsustainable levels. And given that small-scale fishers and artisanal fishers, rely on local fish, the regeneration and availability of fish biodiversity is extremely important for their livelihoods. And of course, it's also important generally for marine health and ecosystem health. And this is why I was saying earlier that the contribution of the small-scale fishing community to the economic and social and even environmental health of a country has been grossly undercounted. And then, of course, there is the World Trade Organization's Agreement on Fisheries, which is the main topic of discussion today. which will compel India, developing countries such as India to curtail subsidies to the fishing sector, and which is going to further endanger the livelihood of these fishing communities. Because again, research shows the majority of global subsidies have gone to large-scale fishers and medium-scale trawlers, but they do not actually go to the small-scale artisanal fishers who most deserve these and require these types of subsidies and supports. Now, in these dialogue series, we are bringing together representatives from small-scale fishing communities, trade unions, social movement networks, academics, researchers, and other activists from civil society organizations. And we want to discuss the issues that affect the interests of small-scale fishing communities in India, and also explore future courses of action to support and strengthen these communities, and also discuss what are the ways forward to ensure ecologically sustainable fishing. Today, of course, we're going to discuss the implications of the recently concluded WTO agreement, as we've said several times, and what is in those provisions, what's in the subsidies, who benefits from them, what are the policy challenges at the international and national levels.
We just had the 12th ministerial concluded in June with, and the Director General, as you may know, kind of made a big announcement of how successful it was with seven or so agreements, and actually most of them have really damaging consequences. So great to discuss the fisheries one today. So because there's not much time, I'll almost speak like a bullet point in a bullet point structure. Okay, so my job here is to kind of share some quick, I guess, information about what we just kind of agreed to. What is the Fisheries Subsidies Agreement? That was an outcome from the 12th Ministerial Conference, which was negotiated in June this year. So basically, these negotiations at the WTO, they were mandated from 2001, but they had kind of stalled in the middle. And it's interesting because you see, the WTO is a trade policy making body, right? It is not a body which really talks about environment, marine conservation, and these kind of issues. Subsidies are seen to be distorting trade. So if a government is giving subsidy to their fishers and another government is not giving, then the fishers who are not getting a subsidy will be disadvantaged in terms of global trade. So that's why subsidies are kind of discouraged in the WTO, and we've had massive fights over also agricultural subsidies. Many of you know the agreement on agriculture, and what it has done is it has actually, blocked developing countries from giving subsidies even to small farmers, frankly. And then rich countries are actually, they have got away with giving huge subsidies. So, though the fisheries agreement and, the mandate, it started with so-called trade objective that, subsidies are trade distorting, so let's discipline them. Let's not have subsidies. But then slowly the environmental issue came in. And you know that the Sustainable Development Goal 14.6 target actually said that countries should discipline fisheries subsidies, but for marine conservation, right? But it said that developing countries, and LDCs, like poorer countries who have very small fisher populations, they should be getting what is called special and differential treatment, that they should get some, concessional terms, they get more time before they have to cut their subsidies and so on. Because in these countries, it is recognized that, fishing sector is still vulnerable. It's not really industrial scale fishing. And therefore, the small fishers in developing countries have to be given protection for some time. But now the interesting thing is, as I said, the WTO is a body which talks about trade rules, and it's a place for very harsh commercial negotiations. So when you bring an environmental agenda, and what we were worried about is that, another agreement like the agriculture agreement will take place. And the negotiations that, that they've been on since 2016, and they got part of it got concluded this year. And the negotiations are testimony to that that harsh commercial agenda is being driven. And we see many developed countries actually who have industrial fishing fleets, but they have pushed consistently, they have kind of engaged in a way that's actually to simply retain and increase their market access. Of course, there are developing countries like China and all, which have big fishing fleets. They also do distant water fishing. So that is there. But we have a lot of Western countries which give a lot of subsidies, and they have basically industrial scale fishing. So during the negotiations, we had seen on the one hand that special and differential treatment for developing countries was under heavy pressure. That, like only for 2 years, or only till 12, not only for those who fish till 12 nautical miles. Now, most of you know better than me that even very small fishers go beyond 12 nautical miles to fish within the EEZ, which means what was being negotiated, they will not get any subsidy. But on the other hand, and India had demanded like there should be 25 years exemption, etc. And I think most developing countries said that the exemptions under special and differential treatment should be extended till the EEZ, because EEZ is kind of their own territory. But these were all under heavy pressure, even till the last night, I would say. But on the other hand, the developed countries, what we call reverse special and differential treatment, continuously had, like they could get exempted. They did not have to cut their subsidies if they could show they were sustainable, they were replenishing fish stocks, etc. And for large fleets and in large scale fishing, there were proposals which had been submitted earlier by Morocco and all, but all those never got anywhere. Like they never could make any headway. India, for example, was one to say non-specific fuel subsidies, which is, not specific to the fishing sector with their general subsidies, fuel subsidies, but the Western countries use them a lot to subsidize fishing also. But that these should be disciplined, India had wanted, but that also got rejected. And many developing countries, because they have very large fisher population, right? So they said the comparison should be based on per fisher. What is the per fisher subsidy? But even that, and I mean, when we look at total subsidies and when we look at per fisher subsidies, I can give you the numbers. There's no time. Maybe we come back to it, but there's a huge difference. I mean, many developing countries like Indonesia, China, and all are very large total subsidizers. But when it comes to per fisher, then actually they are not that high subsidizers. Actually, there are many developed countries who are very large per fisher subsidizers, but there was no discussion that happened on per fisher subsidy, and no discussion on historical responsibility of, who continuously overexploited marine resources. And, this is a very key principle in the climate discussion, but this never made any headway in the WTO. So let me quickly just tell you what happened. What happened was, as the agreement, so now we have an agreement, but which talks only about two pillars. One is IUU, which is illegal, unreported, unregulated fishing, and overfish stocks. But the most important pillar, which is Article 5, was overcapacity and overfishing pillar, which have all these infrastructural subsidies, which are very important for developing countries, because this is the subsidies they use to also develop the fishing sector and so on, infrastructure and everything. So what happened is we now have disciplines for IUU and overfish stocks, but this Article 5, which was very important, which has kind of got stalled because there was no agreement. So it's like a half-cooked negotiation. So mainly the disciplines under Article 5 are supposed to be negotiated now. So that's supposed to lead to this comprehensive, what they are calling a comprehensive agreement, right? But so what we have now on like IUU and overfish stocks, those will stay, but we may have more disciplines on Article 5. The interesting thing is Article 5, as I told you, it's a very important pillar. It was, right? And many, the big subsidizers would have had to discipline under Article 5. But currently, because we do not have those disciplines, in a way, LDCs, developing countries, developed countries are all free to give subsidies till EEZ under Article 5. So it's not like, now developing countries are getting any preferential treatment and concession. So it becomes very important to have that comprehensive agreement if we actually want to meet the mandate of SDG 14.6, the objective of sustainability, because at the moment we do not really have much. We don't really have instruments which will help us achieve those goals. Another interesting thing is what we have agreed under IUU and overfish stocks. So the special and differential treatment for developing countries and LDCs, it's only for 2 years. It's up to EEZ, but only for 2 years. And many of you know, I know Pradipda, Siddharth, you all have followed the negotiations quite closely. You remember that this the special and differential treatment was supposed to be only for very small fishers, right? It was supposed to be for low income, resource poor, livelihood fishing or fishing related activities before. So though there's the Indian Marine Fishers Bill, where actually India is trying to make almost everybody a small fisher. But by that language, if there was preference for low income, resource poor, livelihood fishing and fishing related activities, it would have meant the special and differential treatment would have been reserved only for small scale fishers. But now that is deleted. So that gives more kind of policy flexibility to India. But the fact is that India is now free to give these allow these subsidies not only for very small fishers, but for any fisher, any scale fisher. But the thing is, the biggest danger, I think, it's only for 2 years. So after 2 years, no developing country or even a very poor country like an LDC, like Bangladesh now, they actually cannot give any subsidy under these pillars after 2 years. So that's, I think, a very important point. But you will see that, I was telling you about the reverse special and differential treatment, that rich countries, those subsidizers, they can actually get away if they can show they fish sustainably, and they have the mechanism, they have the monitoring mechanism to show that, they are fishing sustainably. It's much more difficult for poorer countries to show that, but that sustainability exemption for them still is there under Article 4. So again, as I said, developed countries still retaining their own advantages, but we lose any special treatment after 2 years. So Article 5, as I told you, so the big thing is this comprehensive agreement now. And another important thing is, I told you, non-specific fuel subsidies that India was asking that it should be disciplined. That was there till even, I think, the last night of the negotiation. Now it's totally deleted. So there will be no discipline on non-specific fuel subsidies. The funding mechanism that's there to support developing countries and LDCs, it's totally voluntary. There were some pledges, but which is very small. It actually cannot support developing countries if they want to support their small fishers. Now, so this comprehensive agreement, basically, it is supposed to be, Shalmali, I will just wrap up now, just 2 points. So this comprehensive agreement is, they are saying that, see, so there's this peculiar, all kinds of conflicts. It's like a lot of legal mismatches actually in what we have now. So this comprehensive agreement will be negotiated now, but if it is not concluded within 4 years after entry of force of this particular, the current one, what we have now, Article 3, 4, etc., then this current one may be scrapped. Okay, but so first, this current one has to be ratified by national governments, and this ratification can take up to 7 years, then 4 more years. So within 11 years, if we don't have the comprehensive agreement, this agreement will also be dead. But I think just my last word will be that we do need that comprehensive agreement, because this agreement is at the moment so unjust and so unfair, and it frankly cannot meet any sustainability objective, nor can it meet any fair trade objective. And the fact is, there is a danger that if that comprehensive agreement is not agreed, but this bad agreement continues on, then it will be very, very unjust. And I think it will be major injustice to small fishers. So, I mean, I think that governments have to ratify. And for us, we really have to seriously think of how to tell our governments not to ratify the current one until the comprehensive one is agreed. And you can also make out that if they agree to the current one, then they will not have any bargaining power in the comprehensive agreement. They'll never be able to ensure that actually large subsidizers effectively discipline their subsidies. That's never going to happen.